Hello everyone, this is the first of 5 podcasts that will constitute effectively one lesson that we were not able to hold this week. The lesson is about the long-term significance of the Night of the Long Knives. So in the previous lesson we looked at the events of the Night of the Long Knives and we touched upon the immediate outcome of the Night of the Long Knives, but this series of podcasts wants to focus in particular on the long-term consequences of those key events of the 30th of June 1934. Okay, so to achieve the lower grades, you've obviously got to be very, very secure in your knowledge and use the textbooks. Apologise that the pages there for Leighton are incorrect. You've got a different version of Leighton there. I do not have that to hand, so I can't tell you what the pages are. It's in the 40s, I think, late 40s, but you've got that information on the slideshow. Obviously, the new version of Leighton there, pages 238 to 40, Collier, page 144. And crucially then, to deepen your understanding and to access the higher grades, supplement your notes, add additional details. You've got Bullock, very, very, very quotable, obviously a classic text, albeit some of the viewpoints will be outdated. I think definitely if you're going to refer to arguments, interpretations, you should be using in particular Evans and Kershaw. The page references in Evans, notice it's the Third Reich in Power, it's volume 2 and it's pages 31 to 41. Okay, that's the whole section on the Night of the Long Knives and it's the last 3 or 4 pages, sort of pages 38, 39, 40, 41 to look at the outcome of it. And then you've got this book here, Kershaw. What I'll do is I will scan that particular section of Kershaw's book called The Hitler Myth, a groundbreaking book, and I'll talk more about it in podcasts 4 and 5 of the series. But you really do need to make sure you read those pages where he talks about Führer Without Sin, it's called, the Hitler and the Little Hitlers, which is focusing on the Night of the Long Knives. And then Notes from Pridham, the final chapter of the White Book. There are some good documents, pages 185 to 187. Okay, and again, just find short little quotes that you could use in particular to strengthen your introduction and your conclusion. Okay, so the mind map. What I'll do is I'll photocopy that. I'll put a pile outside my office. So again with the space around. So as we go through the podcasts, exactly as you would do in a lesson, just map out the key areas. And zooming in, you'll notice the standard 2 strands. That's ongoing. It's your responsibility really at the end of each lesson to sort of think to yourself, right, what were the popularity issues, what were the efficiency issues? You're working towards section B. It's going to be a big question that will cover the whole of the period, 1933 to 39. It will be on either popularity or efficiency. So you need to be developing detailed knowledge. So you need to be thinking about those issues. I gave you a checklist early on about what popularity means and about what efficiency means. So be thinking about those as we go through. So this first podcast is going to focus in on the immediate significance, and then when we move into podcasts 2, 3, 4 and 5, that's when we will focus in on the long-term issues, which are the strands there. Okay, but this one is on the immediate significance. So in other words, the outcomes as they were known at that time. We pretty much covered these at the end of the previous lesson, so we can move through these fairly quickly. Okay, so immediate significance. Immediate consequences of the Night of the Long Knives. Obviously, just take a look at the picture above. The constitution, as it was when Hitler became chancellor a year and a half earlier, of course, you've got the cabinet, and of course Hitler's power was constrained by the fact he had to present laws to the Reichstag, and by the fact that he could be dismissed by the president, whose job it was to appoint a president after appoint a chancellor after elections. Well, obviously the Reichstag was eliminated as a required instrument of lawmaking. It was effectively eliminated on the 24th of March 1933, the date of the Enabling Act, because of course the Enabling Act said that the cabinet, and remember that's the cabinet, the Chancellor and his ministers, could pass laws without reference to the Reichstag. The Reichstag incidentally continued to meet throughout the Third Reich, or certainly until 1939, but after Gleichschaltung, after June 1933, there was only one political party in the Reichstag. Of course, that was the Nazi Party. So the Reichstag was very much just used as a rubber stamp. Hitler didn't use it to ratify laws. He didn't need to. He went to the Reichstag to give public speeches, and he always did that on the 30th of January, a year after, on the anniversary of him being president, and he did that every single year. So the Reichstag continued to exist. But it was not used as a means of passing laws because it was not required. Laws were passed by the cabinet. Okay, but the institution of the president, of course, remained, and the president had the power. Well, obviously, the power to dissolve the Reichstag, which is listed there, was not really relevant anymore, but the president had the right to appoint and to dismiss the chancellor, and he was supreme commander of the armed forces, directly elected by the people every 7 years. And the Weimar Constitution still continued to exist throughout the Third Reich. So, strictly speaking, Hitler was required, although there was a requirement for elections every 7 years. So that was, of course, the sort of the key problem that Hitler needed to address. And of course, the Night of the Long Knives did that, okay, because what then happened is just over 4 weeks after the Night of the Long Knives, Hindenburg died peacefully in his sleep. He was a very old man. Hitler, of course, knew he was dying, and that's one of the reasons for the timing of the Night of the Long Knives. And the very next day, the cabinet, okay, the Chancellor and his ministers that we've referred to, passed the law concerning the highest state office of the Reich. Now, you need to learn that title. And what that law basically did is it stated that the office of president was abolished and its powers were now merged with the Chancellor. So the position of president and Chancellor now became merged into one position, and the new title of merging President and Chancellor was formerly known as Führer und Reichskanzler, Leader and Chancellor. That was Hitler's new title. Now that law was a violation of the Enabling Act. Okay, so the Enabling Act, passed a year and a half earlier, allowed Hitler to deviate from the constitution. Yes, it allowed Hitler to pass laws for 4 years, albeit without reference to the Reichstag, but the Enabling Act actually explicitly barred Hitler from passing any law that tampered with the presidency. So basically, the law concerning the highest state office of the Reich that was passed as an outcome of the Night of the Long Knives was an illegal law, but nobody objected. Okay, so Hitler was now both head of government and head of state. Head of government as Chancellor, head of state president. He's combined the two, which made him legally incredibly powerful. Okay, especially the case because, of course, the powers of the Chancellor a year and a half earlier had been strengthened by the Reichstag fire decree, the power to arrest at will, the power to centralise policing under the Reich government, of which he was the head of that government, and also the Enabling Act, as we said, the 24th of March, he could pass laws without reference to the Reichstag. So it's an added strengthening of Hitler's legal powers. So the office of president, of course, had been the last obstacle to Hitler, because the president had the power to dismiss Hitler, and the president was also commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now remember, the armed forces were not Nazi, but they were very supportive of Hitler, certainly in the early years, because they admired his achievements in creating, in the national uprising, crushing communism, creating national unity, and in particular once Hitler started to pour money into rebuilding the armed forces, they were very much sold on that. Now the army, the armed forces, and use that term Reichswehr. Okay, that's important in your exam. Use the German word for it. The Reichswehr did not contest that illegal action, Hitler becoming president, because of course that was part of the deal, wasn't it? Is the fact that the army had felt threatened by the SA, and because Hitler dealt with the problem of the SA, the army, as a token of gratitude, allowed Hitler basically to become president uncontested and illegally after the death of Hindenburg. And so the immediate outcome, as it was known at the time, is that the Reichswehr very publicly aligned itself to the new Nazi regime. Lots of public statements, and there were two public statements. One, General Blomberg, remember the Minister of Defence, who was not a Nazi, the day after the Night of the Long Knives, while Hindenburg was still alive, gave a public vote of thanks to Hitler. And then subsequently, in August 1934, the month that Hindenburg did die, remember he died on the 1st, every single one of the 100,000 men who formed the German army went out into fields and publicly swore a personal oath of loyalty to Hitler himself, as their new commander-in-chief, because as president now, because Hitler's absorbed the powers of the president, he is also commander-in-chief. Now, effectively what that meant is the Reichswehr were trapped, because an oath of loyalty is a sacred thing for a soldier. Now, there's a picture there of them all putting their hands up and swearing that oath of loyalty in August 1934. Get the dates right, that's really, really important. Remember, all of this happened a year and a half after Hitler became Chancellor. And they're swearing unconditional support. Now, later on, 4 or 5 years later, the army leaders and ordinary soldiers, of course, realised that Hitler was more than just a man who wanted to rebuild the army and restore unity and pride to Germany, that actually he wanted to use the army to fight an aggressive war. And of course most many soldiers, did not agree with what Hitler wanted to do, but they didn't know that in 1934. But because of that oath of loyalty, they were trapped. So we'll deal with that in a future podcast, because it effectively made opposition to Hitler almost impossible for soldiers because of that personal oath that they had sworn. Okay, that's the end of this first podcast. Hopefully that was useful to you. Move on to the next podcast now, podcast 2, which will pick up that theme of the Reichswehr. Thank you.